Ladies and gentlemen, the story you're about to hear is true. The subject of today's episode is a 1987 police comedy starring Dan Aykroyd and Tom Hanks, where they revive an old police drama and update it with 1980s isms in Dragnet. Ackroyd plays Sergeant Joe Friday of the Los Angeles Police Department, who along with his new partner, Detective Pep Strebeck, played by Hanks, they investigate a series of strange occurrences, which leads them to a cult called Pagan, and its sinister leader, Reverend Jonathan Worley, played by Christopher Plummer, who wants to sacrifice a virgin in the form of Connie Swale, played by Alexandra Paul, and the movie really wants to hit home that she's a virgin, like it reminds you every 2 seconds, where an oddball wacky police buddy caper ensues, with plenty of 1980s edgy humour in order to keep everyone happy for the movie's 106-minute duration.
And on a school night too.
So today we are going to look into 10 things that you didn't know about Dragnet. Now this is the part where I'm meant to say, so let's check it out. Well, guess what? This time, I'm not going to say it. Yeah.
Somebody must have wanted that lion's mane pretty bad to pull a twisted stunt like that.
Although, as Mohawks go, it's not that bad. It'll grow back.
Yeah, and how do you tell that to these kids here who've never seen a lion before and now probably won't have the desire to ever see one again?
Kids, it'll grow back.
Yay! Number 10. Just the facts. Dragnet is a franchise that dates all the way back to the late 40s. It was a franchise created by actor, producer, and scriptwriter Jack Webb, who would also star in the series as the iconic character of Joe Friday. The intention of Dragnet was to show a realistic depiction of police work, utilising relatable and unpretentious acting. The term dragnet itself is a term used to describe the measures used for apprehending suspects, aka dragging a sea net in the sea to try and catch something. Dragnet! The first Dragnet media was a radio show which started in 1949, which proved so popular, in 1951 the radio show made a shift to TV, in a much well-loved crime drama TV series, which ran till 1959. The show would be considered a classic and a staple of its era, as well as the most important, influential police drama in US history. Dragnet would even get several revivals, including one which ran from 1967 to 1970, with the world of Dragnet now being shown in glorious colour, as well as a 1989 revival and a 2003 revival. In fact, the series even produced 2 movies, including a theatrical movie in 1954 and a made-for-TV movie in 1969. So it seems that people just couldn't get enough of Dragnet. Sadly though, in 1982, while trying to create another revival Dragnet series, its creator and Joe Friday star Jack Webb sadly passed away, and this intended revival series of that time was scrapped, which is probably what led to the production of the movie, aka the topic of today's episode. Now, I wasn't really aware of the Dragnet TV show when I was younger, for 2 reasons. A, it was a bit before my time, and B, it wasn't really a thing in my part of the world. But everyone did know that iconic theme. You know, when something shocking happens, and there's always that one person who starts going, dom, da-dom, dom. Number 9. Dan Aykroyd had already starred as Joe Friday before the movie. Now, Dan Aykroyd was a huge fan of Dragnet, particularly the Joe Friday character. He described him as being the most famous cop in the world, next to Inspector Clouseau, which is an odd pairing, but sure, why not? In fact, Ackroyd was such a fan of Jack Webb, aka Joe Friday, he even played the character in a Saturday Night Live sketch all the way back in 1976. However, jump several years later, and Universal Pictures, who owned the Dragnet franchise, decided that they wanted to make a theatrical movie, where they approached Ackroy about the possibility of him starring in the movie, to which, in just the following week, Ackroy accepted the offer. And so the Dragnet movie was now going forward as a Dan Aykroyd vehicle. Well, who else better to get to helm your movie than the guy who was responsible for the Blues Brothers and Ghostbusters? Surely that would be enough to bring in some box office gold. Number 8. Dan Aykroyd also worked on the script. So Dan Aykroyd was working on writing the Dragnet script, along with Saturday Night Live writer Alan Swibel, presumably because the two had already worked together on the as-mentioned Saturday Night Live. I think this pairing took the movie more in the direction of a comedy, a parody maybe, where it's a continuation of the original series and respects it, but also plays things for laughs and sort of spoofs the formula. A similar thing that'll happen 8 years later in fellow TV to movie adaptation, the Brady Bunch movie, and a trend that would continue with the 21 Jump Street movie. And it was decided to make Dan Aykroyd's character the nephew of Joe Friday, while also giving him the name Joe Friday. So I guess you could say he's kind of like the James Bond Jr. of Dragnet. I don't think there's anything wrong with going in a more outrageous comedy direction, as long as it's done respectfully, but most of all, as long as it's funny. And after all, the original series format probably would have seemed dated and cliched at that time, and had they tried to play it seriously, it probably wouldn't have worked. So I understand the logic to go more in the direction of a comedy. I mean, you can't have Dan Aykroyd reading his narration dialogue in the same vein as it was done in the 50s and expect it to be taken seriously, especially in a post-Dirty Harry era at a time with other police action movies like Lethal Weapon.
This is the city, Los Angeles, California. 465 square miles of constantly interfacing humanity.
So Joe Friday is prim and proper and feels like a man from the 50s, with many jokes being aimed at his virginity and flat top haircut. Could this have been a joke aimed at 1950s sensibilities? Possibly. Number 7. Directed by a Superman and James Bond maestro. So it's here we get to the legendary Tom Mankiewicz, whom had already written 3 James Bond movies, as well as act as a co-writer and creative consultant on the first 2 Christopher Reeve Superman films. Now, he had some kind of contract with Universal Pictures, and was brought on board to work on Dragnet, where he would team up with Ackroyd and Swibel to help write the movie's script, in which the script was resembling the movie as we know it. However, there was trouble in paradise, as Ted Kotcheff was assigned as the movie's director. Kotcheff had previously directed First Blood, and would go on to direct Weekend at Bernie's, proving that he had a talent for both cinematic action and comedy. However, Kotcheff wasn't happy with the Dragnet script. So yeah, it's clear that he wasn't seeing eye to eye with Ackroyd, Swibel and Mankiewicz, and didn't want to make their version of the movie. So Universal Pictures chairman Frank Price was like, "Hey, Tom Mankiewicz, why don't you direct the movie yourself?" So Mankiewicz became the director of Dragnet, making Dragnet his directional debut. And he only directed one other picture after Dragnet, which was the John Candy comedy Delirious. Number 6. Casting possibilities. So Dan Aykroyd was up for starring as the movie's main lead, the iconic chili dog chewing Sergeant Joe Friday, be that his nephew who has the same name. But this was only one part of a double act, as another co-lead was needed to play Friday's partner, the sarcastic detective Pep Streebek, who unlike Friday has more of a modern outlook on life and often ridicules Friday's more old-fashioned by-the-book ways, aka a contrast of on-screen cops from the 50s and 80s. Now, Aykroyd's personal choice for the part would have been Jim Belushi, which would have been legacy casting, as Aykroyd was a comedy double act with Jim's late brother, John. However, Jim Belushi wasn't available. Next in line was Albert Brooks, but he turned the part down. Yeah, he didn't want to do it. So Tom Hanks was cast in the role, which would have made sense as at that time he was a huge rising star, having previously just starred in Splash and The Money Pit. And it's great seeing him on screen with Dan Aykroyd, as they both work well together. Number 5, and the rest of the cast. So it's here we get to other cast members who appear in the Dragnet movie. Firstly, there's Harry Morgan, who starred as Captain Bill Gannon. He previously played the character in the revival series of the late 60s, so it's some nice continuity to have him there. The movie's main villain of Reverend Jonathan Worley was played by Canadian actor Christopher Plummer, where he pretty much is playing the character as both smug and sinister. I swear, he played lots of smug villains at that time. Alexandra Paul played the virgin Connie Swale. And yes, the character is even credited as the virgin Connie Swale. So they really wanted it out there that she's a virgin. Just a few years earlier, Alexandra Paul had previously starred in the John Carpenter Stephen King adaptation of Christine, and despite playing a sweet and innocent character, shortly before filming for Dragnet began, she had spent a few days in jail, thanks to protesting against nuclear testing. Jack O'Halloran starred as the movie's villainous henchman, Emil Muzz. Superman fans will recognise Jack O'Halloran as playing Non from the Superman movies, and he apparently got involved with Dragnet thanks to Tom Mankiewicz. And the interrogation scene involving a drawer and his balls is one of the funniest scenes in the movie.
Your balls and this drawer.
Number 4. The filming of Dragnet. So given that Dragnet is set in Los Angeles, it's a given that the movie would be filmed at the location, with Dragnet being shot around LA, in locations such as Venice Beach. While filming the movie, Ackroy really engulfed himself into the Friday character, like he really wanted to get it down to a T. So much so, while making Dragnet, he would study the old Dragnet shows, and also study Jack Webb's mannerisms and how he talked and walked, to the point where, as Ackroyd puts it, he started, quote, dreaming in character. In the movie, there's a scene where the Strebeck character watches TV on his wristwatch. Although the idea of such a device may seem common now, back in 1987, it was probably seen as science fiction. However, it was a real product, called the Seiko T001, and it was first made available in 1982. However, it didn't catch on due to the huge retail price to buy the watch. That, and it needed to be plugged into a really big receiver in order to be able to watch TV on it. And so the product disappeared in the sands of time, only kept alive by its brief cameo in Dragnet. Finally, the house that was used for Connie Swale's house, which was a giant prop, would go on to be reused as Tom Hanks's Ray Peterson's house in The Burbs, just a few years later, as well as being used again in the TV series Desperate Housewives. Number 3. The music of Dragnet. The score for Dragnet was provided by Ira Newborn, who scored several comedy movies in the 80s, particularly John Hughes movies like 16 Candles, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Planes, Trains and Automobiles. His score is fine, and I actually do have a lot of fun with it. But to me, there are some parts where the music kind of sounds like it goes a little Indiana Jones sometimes. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy and hearing shit, but I swear that sometimes it goes a little, Indiana Jones. Snippets of the original iconic Dragnet score is used, but mainly the Dragnet theme that was used was a funky electronic version by British avant-garde synth pop group Art of Noise. However, this 1980s modernised version of the theme was somewhat hit and miss with fans of the classic series. However, the most interesting piece of music associated with Dragnet is a hip-hop rap song actually performed by Dan Aykroyd and Tom Hanks called City of Crime. Yep, Aykroyd and Hanks actually bust out a rap, which is probably one of the most random and weirdest things ever.
I think she is the subject of a sacrifice!
Read him their rights. Read him their rights.
The song was even accompanied by a music video, which was choreographed by Paula Abdul. And yeah, it's pretty cringy. But when I say cringy, I mean cringy in the awesome 1980s kind of way. So if you enjoy Prince's Bat Dance, then City of Crime is right up your alley. Number 2. The Numchuck Scene caused a stir in the UK. Dragnet went for a PG-13 rating, which was still a relatively new rating at that time. This meant the movie could be a little edgier with its violence, drug references, and sex jokes. Needless to say, Dragnet was a comedy movie that had some spice. However, when being distributed in Great Britain, certain cuts had to be made, that being a scene involving nunchucks. For some reason, back then, the British Classification Board were absolutely terrified of nunchucks. So much so, round about that time, all scenes involving nunchucks had to be removed from the British broadcast of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cartoon. Yet, for some reason, in Britain, they thought that little Timmy was going to see nunchucks on TV and then he was going to commit acts of violence, which would lead to the destruction of society. So henceforth, the Numchuck Scene had to be gotten rid of in the UK. However, Dragnet would have further problems in Germany. Thanks to info provided by 80skids.com, which by the way was a huge source of information for this video, it was felt that the word Dragnet wouldn't make any sense to German audiences. So the movie was retitled to... oh god, okay, get ready for this. Weak Balls Don't Bite. So why was the movie called Weak Balls Don't Bite? I have absolutely no idea. Who are these balls? Why are they weak? Well, that's just something you'll have to ask those behind the renaming of Dragnet in Germany. Number 1. Dragnet is, well, Dragnet. Dragnet was released in June 1987, and it was actually pretty successful, bringing in $66.7 million on a $20 million budget. Dragnet also got pretty good reviews from critics, with Ackroyd's performance in particular being praised. Although it did get some criticisms for its use of synth and pop music, with Gene Siskel feeling like the powers that be didn't have enough confidence in the original show it's based on, so they had to try and lure in kids with disco. To me, Dragnet is one of those great comedies of the 80s, one that sadly probably couldn't be made today, but that just adds to its allure. I can vividly remember my introduction to this movie. I remember seeing the VHS cover at a video store, and seeing Dan Aykroyd dressed as a punk while holding his police badge. I just thought this visual looked crazy. I mean, look at him, he looks like a chicken. And thus, I instantly wanted to watch this movie. Like, what possibly happens in this movie that leads to Dan Aykroyd to dress as a punk? Although, shouldn't Tom Hanks's disguise have a moustache? There, fixed it for you. Then not too long after that, my parents rented a video for me and my sisters to watch. Now I can't remember what it was, but at the start of the tape, a trailer for Dragnet was shown, which featured the scene with the anaconda, where Tom Hanks says,
I found the snake!
Well, this one shot caused my sister Becky to absolutely scream. She was so disturbed by this giant snake, she was like, ah, no! Now, to be fair, when this happened, we were all small children, but oddly, this just made me want to watch it some more. And finally, a few years later, I did when it was shown on TV. And so, I love this movie. Okay, it's not an absolute classic, but I put it in the same category as fellow Ackroyd comedy, Nothing But Trouble, in that it's a fun, worthy comedy, with some extra added spice, and it's one that's definitely worth revisiting. So if it's a Sunday afternoon and there's nothing to do and you want to go on a trip down memory lane to remember 1980s humour, then you should totally check out Dragnet. Anyway, I'm Minty. And remember, our heroes of the movie probably wouldn't have succeeded if Tom Hanks didn't put the balls of Non from Superman 2 in a drawer. Think about it. See ya!